My name is Naraga Media Sophie. My metric number is A22EC0234, and I am going to present about final year project proposal. My proposed title is Enhancing Fraud Detection Model Training with Generative Adversarial Networks Generated Synthetic Banking Transactions. And my project type is research based. So the proper background of the research is that most people rely on digital banking transactions to pay for purchases and subscriptions. While it is convenient, cyber criminals raises cybersecurity concerns by exploiting digital payment vulnerabilities. A fraud detection model is used as a security measure where unusual transaction patterns are flagged as potential fraudulent activity. The fraud detection model can be trained with historical data using machine learning. The more, da- the more data you feed into the model, the better it is at differentiating between real and fraudulent transactions. However, a problem arises where there is a limited amount of data to feed this model in order to in order for it to effectively learn, specifically fraud transaction data. So the proposed solution is using GAN. Limited real-world fraud banking transaction data can be addressed by implementing generative adversarial networks, or we call it GANs, in training the fraud detection model. GANs can be trained to generate the data to feed the fraud detection model using its two submodels, a generator and discriminator. And the process of generator and discriminator producing synthetic data and figuring out which data is the original is repeated in an effort to produce synthetic data that is as legitimate as the real one. The synthetic data generated by GANs can be utilized to produce the training data for a fraud detection model. Okay, so the objectives of this research is to pre-process and prepare a real-world banking transaction dataset to use in fraud detection model training and evaluation, to implement a GAN to generate synthetic banking transaction to train fraud detection models, and lastly to evaluate and compare the performance of a fraud detection model with original dataset and GAN augmented dataset using standard classification metrics. Okay, so the scope of this research is that it is focused on how generative adversarial networks can be used to produce synthetic data to train fraud detection models. Um, I am going to use Python, TensorFlow, and a real-world banking transaction dataset to achieve the objectives of this research. And I will not include the development of a fraud detection model. Instead, it uses a fraud detection. Instead, I will use a fraud detection model to test the synthetic data generated by GANs. And lastly, is the performance metric of the study will be measured by true positive, false positives, and logistic regression. Okay, so the project requirements is as stated. Software, I'm going to use Python, TensorFlow, Jupyter Notebook, Excel, and Tableau. And for hardware is my computer spec. For the technology algorithm, I will use generative adversarial network, and the security elements is fraud detection model, and my project area is machine learning in fraud detection. That is all. Thank you.